Hey guys, this is the Revolutionary Mail. My name is Alex, and today I'm going to go ahead and read an article from the Daily Mail in the UK. It's a little older, it's from 2007, but it's still incredibly relevant. Husband Backlash as high-flying wives ditch men they wanted to stay at home. So let's get started. It is the bitterest of ironies. Thousands of men who've given up work to care for their children are being ditched by their high-flying wives, who wanted them to stay at home in the first place. At the time, it seemed like a good idea. After all, Richard Dean told himself, he was earning less than his wife Louise, a high-flying marketing executive. And did it really matter who was at home to look after their children? With that in mind, it was not such a difficult decision for him to give up his career as a manager in the manufacturing industry to look after their 10-month-old son Jack. He hoped it would bring them together as a family. In reality, it sounded the death knell for their marriage. Women may say that they are willing to do this, willing to have this agreement, where the husband, because he doesn't make as much money as the wife, goes home to take care of the children. They may say it because it sounds good, and women are often, happy to toe the politically correct line. But after a while, they build up resentment, and they get angry and pissed off, and then they divorce you, because women don't value men as human beings. Women value men as human doings. They only value you when you can provide something to them, when you do something for them, when we do something for them. That's just the way that this works, unfortunately, for the majority of women. It would be great if we could expect women to not be women, but we have to live in reality here and understand what women are and what men are. That's the only way to lead a life where you don't end up in terrible situations like this guy. I sensed that Louise was becoming more detached and less interested in me sexually within a year of becoming a house husband, says Richard, 50 years old. Within a year. So does that mean like 8 months, 9 months, maybe 10? That's friggin' crazy. She was always picking on me for silly little things she said I hadn't done, like the washing up or not tidying away the toys. See how they do this? They test your strength as a man. They pick at things, they nag you, they find ways to start fights. This is all what is called, shit testing. Testing your strength as a man and whether or not you're going to put your foot down. And fundamentally, his agreeing to be the house husband, which is a term, again, that just has no respect for you. It's a joke. All of this is a test. You're doing what she wants, and she's going to lose respect for you. It was as if she was losing all respect for me just because I was the one at home, doing the housework duties. Then, one day 2 years ago, she announced that she was leaving me and taking the children with her. She told me she was going to go and live with her mother 20 miles away. To say I was devastated does not do my feelings justice. It was as if the bottom had fallen out of my world. Look at the way he phrases this. Then, one day 2 years ago, she just announced she was leaving me. So clearly, there was never any communication that something was wrong, that there were any problems on her end. She didn't do anything to actually try and fix this problem. And that's the issue, guys. You can't expect most women to ever actually try to address the problems in your relationship, because often they won't. They just expect you to figure it out. Try not to get caught in situations like this, guys, because it is awful. Absolutely awful. When they lose respect for you, it starts with little tiny things, taking digs at you, insulting you in some minor way. And you have to put your foot down immediately. For 5 years, Richard from Watford, Herts, had worked hard to become a perfect mother. I can't believe they wrote that. Jesus. To their sons. Jack, who is now 9, and Edward, 7. But from the moment he gave up his job, that's an interesting Freudian slip, Richard says Louise, 47, failed to see him as a man. And think about it this way, too. You hear women all the time say that housework and taking care of kids is so incredibly difficult and incredibly hard, and that men couldn't do it if they had to, blah, blah, blah. Well, you see just how much, or that they'll talk about how it's undervalued and underappreciated. But then the moment that their husband is the one at home doing this stuff, they don't value it at all. Just think about that. Think about the absolute irony there, the hypocrisy there. It's incredible, right? Absolutely incredible. Because the truth of the matter is, they know that they don't value it. That's why she didn't want to do it in the first place. So the moment he agreed to do it, he lost all respect. She lost all respect for him. The phenomenon of the house husband is an increasingly popular one. The number of men deciding to become house husbands has increased by a staggering 83% since 1993. According to recent figures from the Office of National Statistics, there are more than 200,000 fathers in the UK choosing to give up their careers and raise their children at home. But are the couples who go down this domestic route sowing the seeds of marital disharmony? It seems that in many cases, the rise of modern career women has an unexpected and disastrous knock-on effect on many husbands who assume the traditionally female role. In short, having a man whose primary function is not as alpha male breadwinner but domestic drudge just ain't sexy. Exactly. Again, because women don't see men as human beings. We don't have inherent value. We have to prove ourselves out in the world. We have to make something of ourselves in order to be valued by anybody, men, women, children. But especially if we want to be viewed as sexually attractive and romantically attractive, we have to actually accomplish something. It's the way this works. Divorce lawyer Vanessa Lloyd Platt says that in her experience, the decision to allow the wife to be the main wage earner will have a detrimental effect on as many as half of these relationships, and that divorce statistics in these cases have risen by at least 5% in the last 2 years. My warning would be to think long and hard about letting the man stay at home, she says. I know it is very trendy for the wife to be the breadwinner, but in my professional experience, this decision will strain the marriage. It may be fun at first to say I have a house husband, but the wife will quickly begin to resent the fact the man is not pulling his weight financially. Exactly. That's the way this works. That is the way this works. Women will talk a lot of game. They'll say all kinds of stuff. And if you're a man who's ever dated women, you know this is true. You know it's true that they will say one thing and then do the exact opposite. So you can't take them at their word in any context, really. You have to actually observe their actions and respond accordingly. That's the only thing you can do. You kind of have to treat them, like with the mindset of trust but verify. It's good to trust them, but don't. The role these men are performing at home is, of course, very valuable, but women can find it very hard to recognize and respect a man who is doing it. Oh, wait a minute, shoot. I missed a paragraph. She will think you're not supporting me. Within all of us, I think there is still a very deep-seated belief that men should be the protectors. A gradual lack of respect begins to eat into the relationship, and it puts men in a very vulnerable position. Yes, it does. Because not only does it put you in a vulnerable position where you're about to destroy your relationship, it also puts you in a vulnerable position because when you go home and become the house husband, you end your professional career. So when she does divorce you and take everything you have, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to get back on your feet, even more so than if you had had a job. The role these men are performing at home is, of course, very valuable, but women can find it very hard to recognize and respect a man who is doing it. They don't respect it at all. Because here's the thing. So many modern women today think like men. Okay? And for us, we don't respect women in the way that women respect us. We love women. We don't respect them in the way that women respect us. We have to love a woman first before we can respect her. Women have to respect you first before they can love you. It's the way this works. And so a lot of women are now, because they're out in the world earning their own money, when it comes to relationships, they're thinking a lot more like men. And so they'll say they don't have a problem with all of this stuff. They'll express themselves like a man and say they'd have no issue with their husband being at home, taking care of the kids, but they're still a woman biologically, and it eats away at their unconscious. And eventually they resent and hate you and then take your kids. It's a marital time bomb which exploded under Richard Dean's relationship with little warning. Yet he and his wife embarked on their house husband experiment with high hopes. Richard says, our eldest son was just a baby, and I was intrigued by the thought of spending all day, every day with him. It didn't offend my masculinity at all. We'd also just moved into a bigger house, and there was a lot of renovation work to be done. So when the baby was asleep, I would don my hard hat and do some building work. I know my grandfather and my father could never have been house husbands, but I didn't see why there should be a social stigma in this day and age. Again, yeah, it didn't offend his masculinity. And if you look at polling data, a majority of men would happily stay home and take care of their kids, so long as it didn't affect the family financially. Because a lot of men know at some unconscious level that if they're not providing a financial womb in which their family can be raised, it's going to lead to destruction. But Richard says the balance in their relationship quickly shifted. I was happy to do all the cooking and the cleaning and shopping and washing, but I began to feel that Louise was taking me for granted, he says. She'd come home exhausted after a 10-hour day, and I'd be desperate to chat, to have some adult conversation, but she'd say she was too tired. And that's the thing, and I understand that completely, because here's the hard reality that no woman will ever tell you the truth about. It is a hell of a lot more difficult to go out into the world and earn a living than it is to stay home and care for children. And you know why? Because we live in the modern world where we have modern housing, modern electricity, modern laundry, dishwashers, and clothes machine. What the hell are they called? Washers and dryers, as well as running water and modern vacuums and all these modern conveniences that make domestic work so much easier. So of course it's not as labor intensive or as emotionally draining to do this stuff. But that's the one thing women will never tell you, because the women who want to stay at home still want everybody to believe that this shit is so much easier, is so much harder than it is to go out into the world and fight with the world to earn a living. It's not. So I get why she would be tired at the end of the day, and he wouldn't be. He says he poured his heart and soul into being a good mother, the more so after their second son was born 2 years later. I made sure I structured my days with the children. I took them swimming, we went to the park, and I did lots of activities with them, like reading and crafts. I lived and breathed these children, but not once did I regret the decision to put my career on hold. Yes, it's hard not making your own money, but I was doing the essential job of bringing up our children. And I think that's the way most men would feel if they were the ones, if they had an opportunity to do this work. It would be very fulfilling, because the vast majority of men who go out and earn a living aren't fulfilled by their jobs. They're not emotionally or spiritually fulfilled by that work. They do that work so that they can find a woman who will marry them and give them kids. And that's another fundamental difference between the way that women think and the way that men think. 50, 60 years ago, women thought men were out there in the world, like drinking and having fun and partying when they were earning money. And that's not the way that works. The vast majority of men were not out there living this high lifestyle. Again, it's the apex fallacy. It's the fallacy of comparing yourself to the top of the pyramid. And then, without recognizing that most people don't live that way. But then the hammer blow fell and Louise walked out, taking the boys with her. I begged her not to go, but I think she had simply decided she could find someone more dynamic than me, he says. Suddenly, the children I'd cared for since they were babies were being taken away. And that's the amazing thing. She could just decide one day, I'm up and leaving you, and take your kids with you. Take her kids with her. She doesn't even have to have a good reason to divorce you. In most states in America now, I believe it's very, very common for irreconcilable differences to be the justification for getting a divorce. This is why I advise men, don't get married. I don't have a problem with the institution of marriage itself. I just don't like the way that we do it now. So I advise guys, including myself, not to go out and do it. You're setting yourself up to fail. It's all very well to be a house husband, but she had come to look down on me, to think of me as not very masculine and not hardworking. It was as if all the things I did around the house didn't count. That was nothing compared to how hard she had to work in her mind, which was so unfair. See this? Women do this all the time. They project onto men their own thoughts and feelings. That's the way a lot of this works. Which is why when you hear modern women say that they don't want to be a woman who doesn't have a career, because what if their husband decides to just up and leave them one day? The reason they think that way is because they know that's how they are. They know that they'll just leave at the drop of a hat for any reason, because of their feelings. So of course they're going to fear that men are the same way when we're not. We have the statistics to back this. 70 to 80% of all divorces are initiated by women. Men don't leave. Not in any significant numbers. Certainly not to make that argument relevant. Certainly not to make that argument relevant for a woman to decide she never wants to get married or decide she doesn't want to be a stay-at-home wife. What was it just? And the great irony was that we decided together that I should stay at home with the children. I highly doubt that. She decided. That's the truth here. She decided, and he agreed. And that's the first step to losing this relationship, because you did what she wanted. While the pain of the separation was humiliating enough, worse was to follow when Richard attempted to establish proper contact with his children. For 2 years, he fought through the family courts, desperately trying to gain full access to Jack and Edward. And look at that. This was a good man. A good man who had a steady job and good income, who was taking care of his kids for years. And she decides to just drop this atomic bomb on him, take his kids, and not allow him to have access to them. This is crazy. And at the same time, he was forced to meet maintenance payments. Having effectively quit his career 5 years earlier, he had to start at the bottom all over again. I was left out in the cold, he says. It left me in an impossible situation because I'd been out of the workplace for 5 years, caring for my children, and yet now I was expected to get straight back to work and start paying her some maintenance. That's obscene. He wasn't working. Where the hell is he going to get this money from? But this is how completely ruthless so many women are, especially when they lose respect for you. They will be completely friggin' ruthless. The moment Richard's wife said she was leaving him and taking the children, she changed her working hours from full to part-time so she could spend more time with the boys, while her mother helped with the rest of the childcare. It was very cleverly done, he says. I've had to take a series of menial part-time jobs just to keep me going financially, and on top of all of that, I've had 2 years of solicitor's bills and taking my wife to court to get better access to the children, which has cost me at least 20,000 euros. Richard is still desperately fighting for better access to the children, 2 children he did so much to raise, but now only sees every other weekend. It's no wonder I'm suffering from stress and have gone from living in the lovely home we owned to a 2-bedroom flat in a much rougher area of town. Vanessa Lloyd Platt says there is a huge problem built into the legal system at a time when more and more fathers are becoming primary carers for their children. There has been a massive turnaround in roles within a marriage, but there is still a very strong belief in the legal system that allowing the father to have residency of the children is somehow against the natural order of things, and many judges still believe the children will be better off with their mother. Think about that. We live in the era of hegemonic feminism, where we're all feminists now because the belief system is all penetrating to every aspect of society. And yet, when it comes to kids, we still have this belief that it's the mother who is the primary caregiver and should be the primary caregiver in any situation. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It's insane, right? It's a conundrum which is all too familiar to 46-year-old James Thompson, who works as a mechanical engineer, but prior to this was a stay-at-home father for his 3 daughters, Alice, Chloe, and Amy. He lives in Manchester, and like Richard, he found that his marriage to Angela, a 43-year-old who runs her own communications company, began to crumble once he had given up his job. James says, "We made the decision that I should stay at home when Alice was 18 months old. Angela was earning twice as much as I was. Up to that point, we'd had a childminder, but it felt as if neither of us was spending much time with our kid. Alice would scream when we dropped her off with the childminder, so it was obvious that all was not well. We then had a 2-week family holiday in Greece and talked about the future. It became obvious that by the time we'd paid a childminder and both of our petrol costs, there wasn't a lot left from my wage. It actually made financial sense for me to be at home. To my surprise, I slipped into the role with real ease. I shopped, cleaned and washed and cared for Alice, and then Chloe and Amy once they came along. Alice was with a childminder, but just for under a year before I gave up my job, and I was a house husband for about 11 years until we split. Think about all that time they spent together as a family. He was stay-at-home dad for 11 years. 11 years. What the hell is he going to do now that he has to go back out into the world and earn a living again? James says that as a house husband 12 years ago, he was very much in the minority, and many mothers were very distrustful of him. That's another common thing too. There weren't many couples doing this when we first made the decision, and I think some other mothers thought I was trying to seduce them when I chat to them at coffee mornings and play groups, he says. Again, this speaks to all the aspects of modern feminism and modern culture where we have to distrust and mistrust and fear men at all costs because they're so dangerous. In the park, they'd all be sitting chatting to each other while I rushed around physically playing with my kids, and they ignored me. Then when my wife came home, she'd plonk herself down in a chair and put on the TV or read a magazine and ignore me too, while I was still running around with the children. I suppose I didn't resent this, but I thought that was the trade-off. The children meant the world to me. But then in 2005, our relationship broke down completely. We were hardly talking to each other, and she was spending longer and longer hours out of the house. I'm sure she was sleeping with somebody. One day she came home and suddenly told me that she didn't love me anymore, and she was fed up with being the main breadwinner. See this? One day she came home and suddenly told me that she didn't love me anymore, and she was fed up with being the main breadwinner. There's no communication at all. It came out of the blue to me. We jointly agreed that this was the best plan, and it was as if the rug was being pulled out from underneath my feet to be told that she was not happy and deeply resented having to earn all the money. Further arguments followed, and over the course of several months they got more and more heated until in the end I told her to pack her bags and get out if she was so miserable. At first the children stayed with me and she visited them, but then she took me to court. As both Richard and James were to discover, the British courts still favor the mother when it comes to deciding where the children should live in divorce cases, even if the father has previously been the primary caregiver. James has 50-50 care of his children. He has them for 1 week, his wife the next. I suppose I should be grateful that I have half share in my children, but it doesn't feel like that to me at all. I miss them so much, he says. I just have to put up with what little time I have with them and be grateful for that. James says it's madness that in this day and age, fathers do not have more rights over their children. I think it's appalling that courts should be able to rule that a father's needs are somehow less than those of a woman. Just because someone gave birth to the children doesn't mean they love them more. I cope by working very long shifts when my children aren't here, and my company has been really helpful in understanding and letting me work flexible hours when I need to pick them up from school. David Williams, 48, from Cardiff, is still fighting his wife, Mandy, 39, for custody of their 4-year-old daughter, Alexandra, after they split up 2 years ago. He used to work in social services, but is now retired through ill health. His wife used to work as an administration officer, but has given up full-time work to care for their daughter. Like Richard and James, he feels much of his masculinity and power in the relationship was lost when he gave up his job to become a house husband. See, here we go again. It is ironic given that for hundreds of years women have been perceived solely as housewives and mothers, and yet their role has been regarded as essential to society, and they have been respected and valued for it, he says. But once I gave up my career, I lost prestige both in society and in the eyes of my wife. It was as if I had no value. Yeah, because you don't. You're a man. You're not valued as a man. We're not valued as men. We have to do stuff for society. We have to earn respect. It's the way this works, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because everything else around us has changed. If everything around us was still the same, then it wouldn't be an issue. But everything around us has changed, and yet we are still trapped in this position. It's a no-win scenario. There were times in our marriage when I felt as if I was being treated like a subservient Victorian housewife. And that's something else too. Women talk about this stuff all the time, about how, being a housewife or being the stay-at-home mom, makes them a slave. Again, they think this way because they know deep down that if they were the one out earning a living, that's how they would treat their husband. That's how they would view him. That's why they think this way. This is all projection, guys. Remember that. I'd be criticized if the washing wasn't hung out exactly how my wife wanted it, and she used to check to make sure that I had cleaned the house perfectly, checking for dust and badly washed plates. Look at that. You picked poorly, my friend. My wife was a real control freak, and she wanted everything to be done perfectly. My standards weren't good enough, even though I had run a house perfectly and successfully on my own before I even met her. I spent my days cooking and cleaning as well as doing everything for our daughter. David is still very bitter about the outcome of their divorce. Even though I had been looking after my daughter for 2 years, when it came to our divorce, the judge assumed my wife should be the one to have the custody of our kid just because she's a mother, he says. This was despite the fact that she was working full-time and I had been the primary caregiver. Now that she has full custody of Alexandra, she works part-time from home. It is a situation that makes me weep. I miss my daughter so much. He now lives alone in the little cottage he owned before he married and sees Alexandra only every other week. She lives 110 miles away from me, away from the friends she made when she lived in our village and my family in the area that was her home. I'm allowed to see her for 2 weekends a month. That means a round trip for me of more than 200 miles. It is annihilating me, both emotionally and physically. If current trends are anything to go by, the number of men deciding to become house husbands is set to rise even more dramatically. But how many of those men, who no doubt start out by regarding themselves as paragons of sensitive modern manhood, will end up wishing they had never left the office at all? And that's the end of the article, guys. That's the world we live in now. So if you're out there and you're considering getting married and having kids, be careful. Make sure you pick well. Because even then, even if you thought you picked right, it may not matter. I'm going to go ahead and end this video here, guys, because it's getting pretty long. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, go ahead and leave them in the comments section below. If you want to contact me directly, you can do that at the Revolutionary Mail at revolutionarymail@gmail.com. Again, my name is Alex, guys. This has been the Revolutionary Mail. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.